Okay, I think I th- all right. I think we're currently live, so we're going to have a post-debate analysis by myself and several of the debate team members that will join me on the Zoom call. And so, a few post-debate analysis things for me. I think this absolutely is a breath of fresh air. When it comes to the actual ability of our debate participants to be able to provide each other with a sufficient amount of time to be able to respond to arguments, so on and so forth. And so clearly this is night and day in comparison to the presidential debate. But the issue is obviously, while this vice presidential debate can be quite important in reference to the age and health question of both presidential candidates, and but is the American public really going to spend a lot of time determining whether or not the VP candidates have sufficiently proven themselves that they can become president? Is that going to be the motivating factor when they walk into that ballot box and make a decision on who they're going to vote for? So both candidates, still had to overcome what I would say is a low bar to prove that if they took over the helm of the presidency, that they could do it, with enough quality that the American public can feel confidence in them as vice presidential picks. So they, could present, they can lay out basic arguments for and against their two presidential candidates, and it seemed to work out, perfectly fine. So they met that basic requirement of this particular debate. So that's goal number one. I don't think either candidate really hurt themselves. There aren't any major gaffes or anything that would tank the election in the end for either candidate. And so we're stuck again in basically neutral from my perspective, which means not a whole lot is going to change as we look at, in all likelihood, the polls that go out. And we're going to see if the American public, and especially within swing states, people's perspectives and their willingness to vote for either of their candidates have really changed. Similar to previously the presidential debate, the amount of swing voters that are available is very small. Most people actually know, in all likelihood, which way they're going to vote already, which means most people that tune into these types of debates are really just looking for a confirmation that this candidate can both fight for the candidate that they want to vote for, so the VP fighting for their president, and helping to increase enthusiasm around that candidate. VP Pence clearly did that. One of his roles in being selected is to give that kind of evangelical Christian uh, background for the President Trump. But the other idea was also that Pence was going to act as a moderator of sorts, somebody that brought a sense of professionalism into the White House. And whether or not he successfully did that over the 4 years is, I guess, open to interpretation. But from my perspective, not a whole lot has changed. And if you look at that eighth graders, question about the fighting and division that's happening in American politics, it would suggest that we're still embroiled in a lot of conflict, and partially, directed at, Trump's strategies and tactics and the way that he tends to deal with conflict in opinions. Kamala Harris, came off as she has in a lot of the vice presidential debates. She was strong and confident in a lot of the arguments. Her record, while it did, make a little bit of an appearance in this debate, it honestly wasn't that big of an issue in the end in terms of her being an attorney general in California, or her voting record in the Senate. So while a few issues were brought up, is it going to have a lasting effect? Not really. The trouble right now, and one of the reasons why Trump is having an issue gaining traction in the polls, is that COVID continues to be the core issue that we're talking about. With President Trump coming down with the virus, it then amplified that message again. And so while the presidency would like to focus on the economy, the law and order type message, uh, given the format of this debate and the way that the questions were asked, it focused on COVID for a large percentage of it, a little bit of the Supreme Court, but really, divisiveness, COVID became a significant part of the debate, a massive part of it. So it's very hard that if you are currently behind in the polls, if you're constantly being defensive in defending the actions of the presidency rather than being offensive, where you were talking about the great things, the successes, the policy successes, the that make America great again thing, that Trump and his administration have put forward. If you're not talking about what was made great, you're kind of behind, the eight ball here. So walking away from this debate, my projection will be that the number of people that watched will be higher than some vice presidential debates. So in comparison to Kaine and Pence during the last election cycle, it will likely be higher. And a part of that is Kamala Harris being the first African American, Black, and South East Asian candidate in the VP role will gain some interest. It's a significant identity and perspective that's being brought to the table there. So that's amazing. And being a woman again, nominated to the VP role of the party, following Palin and Geraldine Ferraro, also within those positions. But is it going to be as big as maybe the Biden Biden Palin debate? I don't imagine that. Partially because my assumption is what drove people to watch that VP debate was Palin was such a spectacle, an enigma as a governor, but not well known within America. She didn't run for the presidency of her party, which means that there was a lot to get to know with Palin in that particular debate. Kamala Harris now, as a senator, as well as running for the nomination under the DNC, was at least known enough to the voters of the Democrat side of things that may suppress some of the willingness or desire to watch. But we'll see. Will it have an impact on the polls? I doubt it. Who won or who lost in this debate depends on who you ask. But those are a few of the takeaways that I think that I would take, from this particular debate. So I'll open it up. If any of the debaters on the team would like to, talk about their response to the debate, I will hand the baton over to them. Mehul.
Sure, I'd love to offer some of my thoughts. I think, in just comparing it to the presidential debate, there were a lot of rhetorical differences. So, obviously, the way the candidates presented themselves was a bit different. As you noticed, the use of the plexiglass between the two candidates was interesting. How both candidates were seated and seemed a little bit calmer relative to Trump and Biden was also interesting. But I think, moving beyond that, just the way the two candidates spoke was a lot more calm, relaxed, and it seemed like they thought through their answers before directly jumping into them. And so a lot less back and forth, almost bickering, but a little bit more substantive, although still somewhat lacking than maybe what I personally would like to see. But I think Kamala Harris did a great job of, directly looking at the camera, talking to the average American voter and really resonating with them. And to me, at least, that spoke a lot of value. And so did not necessarily see that as much from Pence as you could maybe see. He was looking around a lot more. He wasn't making direct eye contact with the camera. So I think those rhetorical moments definitely stood out to me. I think you were also right on the point of Kamala Harris's background. I didn't think that became an issue as much as it did, but I think she did a good job of kind of deflecting away from that sort of line that Pence could have gone down if he had wanted to. And so I think that was a useful rhetorical strategy from her end.
So, what do you think? Is this going to be a vice presidential debate to be remembered going into the ballot box between now and November 3rd? It doesn't have much of an impact in the end. What's your take?
Sure. So personally, I haven't really paid attention to many vice presidential debates in the past, so it's hard for me to make a distinct comparison to maybe what they were like before. But I don't think at the end of the day this is going to change any voters really preference towards either of the candidates. To me, this debate seemed much like a wash. Neither candidate was really ahead or on top of one another. So I think voters, for the most part, are going to stick with whom they were before. I think, like you mentioned, the coronavirus and the response to that are really what's going to be driving the narrative as we move into these final 4 weeks. And so, to me, the debate is somewhat marginal. And when at least voters are going to the polling booths, they're not thinking about a candidate's performance in the debate.
So, do you think that there was anything that, let's say, Pence could do to help out, the cause of their campaign?
Sure, I think he can serve maybe as a reassurance to some of the more moderate Republicans that are now moving towards Joe Biden. I think we've seen a trend with some of the mainstream GOP, most notably John Kasich, as an example of individuals who are moving towards Joe Biden as kind of a response to Never Trump. And so I think Mike Pence's performance today serves as kind of a reminder to the broader GOP that there are more establishment GOP members, more mainstream GOP members that can cater to some of the more moderate Republicans. And so I think he serves as a great reinforcement to that. And if he showcases that he's capable of shaping the administration's goals and priorities coming into the next term, that can be a great source of leverage for the GOP.
Okay, sounds good. So I don't know if Cam and Hope, are you all around?
Yes.
Yep.
So what do you think?
Yeah, I think that you and Mehul summed up my thoughts on the debate nicely. Just sort of checking in on what the main Twitter polls and main Twitter action are after this debate. Discounting all the posts about the fly on Mike Pence's head, which took up quite a lot of oxygen on the Twitter room, apparently.
Yeah.
There does seem to be an interesting amount of tweets somewhat attacking the vice president's, the vice presidential candidates in the opposite direction that you would think. Trump recently tweeted attacking Kamala Harris's record as prosecutor as overly targeting Black and minority populations, prosecutor, which is somewhat the opposite attack you would expect given that Republican Party. Same thing on the fracking question, I think was an interesting question that has a lot of people on Twitter currently heated, is the potential flip-flopping as to the commitment on the Green New Deal and climate change responses writ large. But yeah, those are the current things that seem to be getting a lot of discussion started on public forums on social media right now, immediately after the debate.
Yeah, and so I mentioned this during some of the debate analysis. I posted an advertisement that's currently being played within Pennsylvania. I mean, one of the arguments that's being made is that Biden will just fold over to the radical left, whatever that is. I mean, radical insert anything has been thrown about for elections for decades. But that they'll just fold and then get rid of the police, however that would happen, since police departments are relatively local. And so it's kind of fascinating that in this particular debate, Kamala Harris being an AG, that they're making the opposite argument that she's too aggressive, with the police. So how do you think that plays out in terms of the rationale of moving forward, going into the end of the election?
I think that it's pretty hard to speculate. From my stance and from people that I'm talking to, it seems to really just be less convincing swing voters to not vote for either side, not really having that much of an impact on them, but rather a question of how motivated Biden's base is to turn out, specifically youth vote and the youth turnout. And while youth turnout does tend to be low as a age group, there are certain issues that youth voters care a lot more about. This happens to be one of them. So it is a question of if the Trump campaign's attacks are successfully demotivating some of that vote and some of that turnout.
So you think that moving forward, if there's another presidential debate or any of the additional advertisements and things that are coming out from the Trump Biden or the Trump Pence campaign, the goal is to demotivate each other's bases. That's what they have left.
Yes, it really seems that way. It seems that, at least based on Kamala Harris's stance on the Green New Deal, fracking, and this her sort of prosecutorial record in this debate tonight, that she really is trying to appeal more towards the moderate voters, towards swing voters, rather than appealing to a quote unquote radical left, which a lot of the youth voters would empathize with and probably label themselves as. And likewise, the Pence-Trump campaign, particularly on the climate change questions, seem to really be aggressively painting them in that corner of saying, hey, are you going to choose youth voter turnout, or are you going to choose fracking jobs in Pennsylvania? From a bit perhaps of an overly cynical view on my point, but that's what it seemed to come across as.
Okay. I think we can probably end it there. Is there anybody else? Jacob, do you have any responses?
No, pretty much what everyone else was saying, that it seemed like it was a wash of a debate. I don't think anybody came out ahead. If anything, I think Mike Pence might catch some flack because he didn't seem to answer any of the questions directly, he seemed to dance around to the topic he wanted to answer on. Other than that, though, I don't see this moving the needle anyway significantly.
So it seems like in the end, the biggest play that's going to happen is the third party member, which happens to be the fly that landed on the head of Mike Pence. But interestingly enough, this is not the first time that a fly has played havoc within presidential debates. There was an instance of a fly landing and messing around with Hillary Clinton in the past. And some of the more right-wing conspiracy theory websites use that as an argument to claim that she was in league with the devil. So I doubt that we'll see something similar coming out. But just in terms of chuckles and things like that, and having a lighthearted end to this discussion, something to laugh about. And I'm sure we'll see it on Saturday Night Live, moving forward. Thanks again to everybody who listened in. Apologies for some of the technical errors that we had in the beginning. My pre-debate analysis will be and has been uploaded at the very beginning of the post. So if you're interested in what my take was beforehand and what actually happened, feel free to hop on and watch it then. I just wanted to say thank you for paying attention. Support your debate team if you're interested in giving. Hop onto our debate website and click on give. Otherwise, we look forward to continuing this conversation going forward at the next two presidential debates, if they happen. Thank you. Have a good night.